recent publication, just one, which is a memoir. And she is also someone who is particularly close to our hearts as Strange Ink, because she is one of the winners of the book awards. So she won in the non-fiction category, and we just wanted to celebrate her and just learn from her, inshallah. So Bismillah, Sister Nour, welcome. Could you share a little bit about what your book is about, just one, your memoir?
First of all, thank you, Aisha, for having me. I'm really excited to be on this platform and to talk about my book. And thank you for the award. So the book is basically, it starts talking about a medical mission journey that I went on in 2011 to treat Syrian refugee children with the first wave of Syrian refugees that went to Turkey 12 years ago now. Back then there was only 8,000 refugees, and now there's 6 million refugees from Syria scattered throughout the world. So it starts there, and then it continues on to another medical mission, again treating Syrian refugees in Greece, and then going on another medical mission to Yemen. And basically throughout the book and throughout the journey, I never recognized myself as a Syrian refugee because I grew up in the United States. But at some point in the journey, there is a recognition that, hey, well, my dad sought asylum here in the United States more than 40 years ago. And I was born in Syria. So that actually makes me a Syrian refugee technically. And so just the mind shift of who I thought I was and who I actually am, and what that means, and especially that, kind of mindset happened when Trump was running for presidency, and a lot of anti-refugee and anti-immigrant sentiments were displayed on the national stage. So there was a lot of self-reflection on that and what that actually means. So that's really basically the book in a nutshell.
Wow. Jazakallah for sharing. And so what I got from the process of writing the book, and I would love to dive into why you chose memoir specifically as a platform to share your story. And the reason why I'd love to dive into that soon, inshallah, is just there's so many different ways that we can tell a story. It could be told through journals, it could be told through fiction, poetry. So I'm gonna ask you that question very shortly, but I just wanted to say what spoke out to me about was the identity piece, how this whole experience just made you reflect over your identity as a Syrian refugee, and just acknowledging that, especially in a climate of Trump, So my question is, when you came to this realization that you are a Syrian refugee, was it through the process of writing this book, or was it something that was through your experience during what you wrote about?
I think a lot happened when there was a lot of talk against DACA recipients, the Dreamers, and then especially there was some letter writing from some DACA medical students, and that really hit home for me because I thought, like, well, that could have been me. I could have been, my parents brought me here without, not consulting me at the age of 3 or 4. And, like the DACA recipients, they didn't know any other country. They don't know any other country, just like me. Like I know Syria. I've been to Syria a few times, but I wouldn't call it home necessarily because I've spent my whole life here basically. And to think about, getting hurled home to where I was born because I was born in the wrong place, or, just things that were not out of my control. I think that for me was like, wait, he's talking about people like me, so it was part of the writing process, but also part of it was just like watching the news and reflecting on what's going on and why there's so much anger against people just trying to flee violence. That was my experience when I was talking to all of these Syrian refugees. It's not like they're like, oh, I want to go to Turkey to make $1 or to Germany or whatever. All of them, if most of them, if not all of them, were fleeing barbaric violence. So just reflecting on just circumstances, I don't think we reflect on our circumstances a lot. And, if you don't, you might think like, oh, well, I deserve to be here. Whereas, when I would be in these refugee camps, in my head, it was always like, wow, there's no reason I should be in safety and security and not in a refugee camp with my two little kids. Like there's no rational explanation for that. Of course, if you have faith, that there's an explanation. But if you don't have if you don't come from a faith background, there is a lot of questioning, like, why am I here and why am I not in a refugee camp fleeing bombs and like horrific violence? So part of it was writing, but a lot of it was just reflecting on experiences in my life.
That's so interesting. And they say a lot of the process of the writing is through the reflection. It's a lot of for example, the walks you go, the thoughts that you have about a manuscript. The work happens in the subconscious. So I love that there were so many realizations. But another thing is, what made you choose the memoir? Why memoir?
Well, I'm a science major. Um, I never thought of myself as an author. Like that was never on my radar when I was a little kid. My dad is a pediatrician, and so I was exposed to medicine very early. And since the age of third or fourth grade, I knew I wanted to be a physician. And I never thought about writing, although I went to a liberal arts university. So that, in a nutshell, is to say that I'm not super creative. And so to think about writing fiction or poetry is just like way out of my comfort zone box. And so memoir is just sounded like the most rational way to explain how I'm thinking, how I'm feeling, because it's just documenting what's happening. It's not, there's no real, I guess there is some creativity to it, but I think there's a lot more creativity that goes into poetry writing or fiction.
That's so interesting. And also so you majored in medicine. You always knew you wanted to be a doctor, and just you're not just a doctor. Doctor is such a huge and amazing accomplishment, doing some amazing work, but you're a specific type of doctor, right? Which is very rare, even in the United States, not, I'm sure, just amongst Muslims, but just as doctors in general. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that as well. But I noticed that you knew you had a story, you knew what you wanted, and you did it. And for so many writers, for so many women, just for humans in general, that is so hard to do, to know that you have this dream, and then just following it and doing it in the best way that you can. So how do you do that? How do you keep motivated? How do you follow that passion when it's sometimes hard to grasp, personally, for so many of us?
Yeah, so I started writing in 2019. That's when I started writing this book, and actually didn't take that long to write because I honestly didn't think I could write a book. So I'll just tell you how it happened. I was after I came back from Yemen and I had my baby, I went to California. I had some real postpartum blues with this last baby of mine, and I told my husband, like, I need to get out of here. I need some sun. I need, like, this, something's not right here. And we'd been married for a long time. We'd had three other kids together, so he recognized that, okay, this lady needs something. So I told him I was going to go out and visit a friend in California for a couple of days, taking the baby with me. And so I did. And then I happened to, while I was there, my friend Hanan, introduced me to a Yemeni American young man whose name is Mukhtar al-Khanshali. And I don't know, you may have heard of him because a book was written about him, called The Monk of Mocha by Dave Eggers. Dave Eggers is a famous American author who's written books about the Lost Boys of Sudan, Katrina, and other tragedies. So Mukhtar was a young Yemeni American who grew up in California, was going to go to a law school, but decided that wasn't for him, and then somehow found a passion for coffee, and decided that knew that the history of coffee came from Yemen, where his grandfather, or his lineage came from. So he went to Yemen to look at coffee plantations. And while he was there, the war broke out in Yemen, and he had to hightail it out of Yemen. He like had to, I think he had to take a boat to Ethiopia. He was even interviewed by CNN. So anyways, while I'm in California visiting my friend, she introduces me to Mukhtar. And so as we're talking, he's like, oh, I had to hightail it out of Yemen recently. And I'm like, oh, so did I. And so we start talking about Yemen. And so that, that experience came and went. And then a year later, I hear about this book that Dave Eggers wrote about him, and they do a book tour. So my husband and I go to the book tour in Chicago, and it's at this downtown, Pashi place. And there's all of these older people who probably follow Dave Eggers and have read his books. And so they're coming to this event. There's like 200 people. And there's Mukhtar and Dave, and they're talking about Yemen and the history of coffee and the war and Muslim culture. And it just dawned on me, like, these people might have never been able to identify Yemen on a map had it not been for this book, and how they humanized the Yemeni story. And I had also, when I was younger, had previously read a book by former U.S. ambassador in the United Nations, Samantha Powers, who was advising President Obama during the Syria crisis. She wrote a book called The Problem from Hell, and it's about genocides. So she talks about the genocide in Bosnia and Rwanda, and she argues that if there's no financial gain or other security gains, the United States or the West do not intervene in these kind of situations unless the public cares. And so in my head, I was like, well, no one cares about Syria. And that really was the impetus to write, was thinking that, okay, maybe if I write a book and humanize the Syrian story, people will care about Syria, and this crazy 12-year crisis will end, and these 6 million refugees can go back home. So that was really the impetus to write the book. And so I wrote it, and I didn't think it would, I thought I'd write an essay, but then I just, all of these stories kept coming back, and I kept writing, and it was done in about 3 months. But then I couldn't find somebody to publish. Like, nobody wants to publish a sad story about Syrian refugees. So I would query agents, and I would get rejected, or people wouldn't even answer. And I would like send 20 emails at a time, cut and paste my pitch, and I would send all these emails, and then I wouldn't get a reply. And then I would think to myself, this is so stupid. I'm just a physician. Like, what am I doing? This is dumb. I'm wasting my time. And then my husband would say, but you already wrote it. And then I would table it for a little while. And then something would happen in Syria, like a hospital would be bombed, or an ambulance would be bombed, or chemical weapons were used. And so then I would be like, oh my God, no, I got to write this. I got to find a way to publish this book. So then I would do it again. I would query all these agents. And so I would go in this cycle. Like, I would query all these agents. I would either get rejected or no reply. And then I'd be like, this is so dumb. I'm not going to do this. This is so dumb. I'm just a physician. And then my husband would say the same thing. And then something would happen in Syria. And so I just kept happening. And then COVID hit in 2020. And then really I was like, oh my God, I got to just like keep my family alive. And I can't focus on this right now. Until the end, not that we're over COVID, but things kind of resettled again. And in 2022, one of my former roommates, who knew I was trying to write this book, told me about a publisher, and that she heard about on a podcast, who's now my publisher. But I queried her too. I sent her a pitch, thinking in my head, oh, this isn't going to go anywhere. And then the next day she's like, let's set up a Zoom meeting. And so it really took a lot of like perseverance, I would say, to just, and I think if I didn't really believe so deeply in wanting to change the situation for Syrian refugees, I would have left it a long time ago, because that really was the impetus, and remains the impetus that keeps me going to either talk about the book, or just do more for the book, just to keep that message alive, and to try. I'm not the only one. I mean, there's Syrians all over the world trying to make a change, but that's really like how for me, that's how I kept going.
Wow. SubhanAllah, so you queried and you queried and you queried, and then there was rejections. So I kept hearing you say there was like, there's this feeling of, I'm just a physician. I'm just a physician. That's a huge thing, a physician, SubhanAllah. So, but then you kept going, because there was this feeling, there was this huge purpose behind it. There's this big why. You had this need to push forward this message and this awareness as well. So that's amazing. And in discovering your big why, how did you choose this specific instance? I know it's a major life change, a major aspect in your life as well, but how did you choose this specific experience, and why this one, as opposed to a different time in your life? Why write about this time specifically?
I just think that it was really the like not seeing, like I think if you talk to Syrians in general, we're so heartbroken about what's going on in Syria. We've been heartbroken for 12 years now. And every single thing that happens, we're like, oh my God, there's no way the international community will ignore this. And then it gets ignored. There's so many human rights violations, which I'm sure there's other human rights violations across the world. But I think that a lot of people don't really know what's been going on in Syria for the last 40 years. For example, how many people have disappeared, how much torture there are in Syrian prisons, and so that really, you could say that the book is a love story to Syria. It's just, I'm not super nationalistic, but it's just like, for me, it's just devastating that if you watch some of the YouTube videos of the initial protests and what Syrian youth, young people really were hoping, or it's just, you can only be heartbroken for what happened in Syria if you actually follow and listen and watch some of the documentaries that have come out in the last 12 years. And so that's really it. Like, it's just like that. It's just a burning hole in my heart of what's happening in Syria. Of course, I could have talked about a million other things. And I do talk about some other things in the book, like misogyny in medicine, whether it's directed at me as a physician, a female physician, or a female patient, or a mom of a patient. I do talk about some other things, or like Islamophobia or xenophobia in the medical school admissions process. But really, at the heart of the book is the Syrian crisis and what's happening in Syria.
Subhanallah. There's so many things that are happening in the world, and it's so easy to say that, this is happening here, but this is happening there, and this is happening elsewhere, and everyone is suffering. But that doesn't take away from the suffering of one place being so huge, so much pain there as well. So every place needs to be spoken about. Every place someone needs to advocate for it. And that's why I feel like it's so important what you're doing, because you're advocating for a cause, which I don't hear very much about. So when your book came, especially to the Strange Ink, you submitted it to Strange Ink Book Awards. You were the first one who submitted it, and when I read a little bit about what it was, I was like, okay, this is a very important story, subhanallah. So I was excited to see what the judges would think as well. But as for so I have a couple of questions. The first one is, do you have any books that you're going to be planning to write in the future, inshallah? I'd love to hear about that. And I'll ask the second one after that one, inshallah.
So I don't have any plans for a subsequent book. Some people have said you should, but book writing is not a lucrative business, as you know. And my husband will joke sometimes, like, are you going to your other job that doesn't pay anything, or that actually is taking money out of our account? And I'm like, yeah, that's where I'm going. So it's not, and again, I didn't write it for money. I had no financial goal here. Like, it really was just stemming from what I just said. So, thinking about writing another book, I think, like, will end my marriage. No, just kidding. There's nothing. I mean, sometimes I think about writing about birth trauma, because I've experienced I've experienced a traumatic birth with my first child, and there was a lot of trauma associated, and a lot of subsequent. If I tell you, you'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe you had more kids even. So sometimes I think about that, especially as a pediatrician and a mom. So sometimes I think like, okay, maybe I could write a book about that, because I think that would really be helpful. Because when I meet, first time moms, there's um, if being a first time mom is a very difficult process, even if you're a pediatrician. So I think that would be maybe another subject that it would be like so far off from this, but there's nothing in the immediate future.
And I just want to, well, inshallah, the idea is there now, isn't there? So you have an idea for something, and I think it's so important, the birth trauma as a mother and as a pediatrician as well. You work with children all the time. You work with newborns. I'm sure you work with newborns as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you work in a specific department in infectious disease.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear more about that, because I it's just an amazing discipline, So yeah, please share.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love what I do. So yeah, I'm a pediatric infectious diseases physician, and as you alluded to earlier, there's only 1,500 of us in the country who are board certified pediatric infectious diseases physicians, and I think a lot of that is because there's actually no money in this field. So it's not a well-paid field. So if you're going to go into medicine and spend all that time and all that training, a lot of people would like to make some money at that. And so, like, we're probably one of the lowest subspecialties or specialties in the continuum of finances. But anyways, I still really love what I do. So I take care of children who have really aggressive or invasive infections. So that could be like tuberculosis or infections in their brain or their bones, or like aggressive lung infections. And I love children, and they're just so resilient and they bounce back so quickly most of the time. And if you look at the continuum of my life, you would think I knew that from the very beginning, because I studied cellular molecular biology. But there was so many things that happened that ended me up in pediatric infectious diseases, and things that, like, said from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I did, it's not like I started out in there, but if you look at my resume, you think that that's where I was going, but it was just, the
Wow.
way Allah sent me in this specific path. But I had, it didn't, it wasn't my plan in the beginning. But I am so grateful. I really love what I do. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. And there's this essence of a strength that I'm feeling, like a strength of self, a sense of self. Like there's this comfort as well in knowing that, okay, I love to write and I love what I'm doing, and that's what I'm going to do, inshallah. And I love that so much. So what advice would you give to women who are writers, who also have such a strong and beautiful message that they want to give to the world? What advice would you give to us?
So the first advice would be, don't give up, because I think, I could have given. I mean, I tried to give up so many times along this process, but then something, like I said, something would happen, and my husband, alhamdulillah, I have an encouraging husband. So surround yourself with people who encourage you and lift you up. That's really important too. But really, don't give up. Just keep trying. Like it, and I would say, and I did this probably a million times along the process. I kept praying istikhara, because I'm very introverted and private, and writing a book like this exposes you in a lot of ways. So I just kept thinking, like, oh my God, am I really going to do this? Like, is this really the right thing for someone like me? And so I kept praying istikhara every step along the way. I prayed istikhara probably 100 times in the last like week before we hit the publishing button, because I was kind of worried that, again, like, this is really exposing myself. So pray istikhara, don't give up, and surround yourself with people who are encouraging, uplifting, and who know how to direct you to ways that you can improve your writing.
Wow, Jazakallah khair. So there was a sense of fear in publishing this book, and I just want to speak to the introverted part as well. How did you did istikhara, you trusted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Was there any aspect of working through things that you can give us advice on? A lot of our listeners and followers are introverts, highly sensitive, so we'd really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
So again, I think you can't you can't tell from this interview that I'm super introverted. And then when I go to like book clubs and stuff and I speak about the book, you can't tell that I'm introverted. But if you speak to my husband, you'll know that I am super introverted. And so the point is that the message is so strong for me. The idea of why I wrote this book is so strong for me that it overpowers that. It overpowers the introvertedness, and it's allowing me to do these speaking events. Like I'm speaking at a couple of other things in the next couple of months, which, you know, for me, it's like, oh my God, my GI system is going crazy because I hate public speaking and I'm not good at it, I don't think. And I'm kind of shy and introverted. So, but the message is so strong within me that it helps overpower all of that. And I, you know, rechecking your intentions too, like checking back with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and thinking about your intention is really helps also propel forward. So I think when the message is so strong, like your introverted self just moves out of the way.
I love that. Thank you. Jazakallah khair. So Sister Noor, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, with your important message. And for our viewers, all the information to our sister's book is going to be captioned somewhere on this video, inshallah. So thank you again for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was such a nice interview.